Hi, everybody. Hi, students. Hi, Charles. Um, I'm Natasha, and I am the CEO of GAHARA. And welcome to our boutique. So, GAHARA is we are a batik uh, textile provider, and we make batik, handmade artisanal batik. We are based in Kelantan, specifically Kampung Penambang, which I'll come back to later, why it's unique. And what you see here are all handmade batik from just one state in Malaysia, Kelantan, and we are located at two places. One is at the National Textile Museum in Kuala Lumpur, near the Dataran Merdeka, which is where I am, and the other one is in Kampung Penambang itself in Kota Baru. You may not you may not have heard of the Textile Museum because a lot of people have not heard of it. But actually, we are part of the Sultan Abdul Samad building. So that means, this is a very the building itself. It's very important, which is why GAHARA chose to be part of it and not at KLCC Mall or any other fancy mall, because the idea is to promote Malaysian batik, but most importantly is to also provide education in understanding what Malaysian batik is all about. So I want to share a little bit about what makes GAHARA GAHARA. Yeah. So this we have a tagline that says it's not batik Malaysia, it's not batik Indonesia, it's GAHARA. Because GAHARA was actually a company that was established about 13 years ago by my colleague, who is now the creative director, Nick Faiz. He comes from a third generation of batik makers. But when he started off, he was an architect. So that is why if you look at our logo, it has a kufi design, yeah, very architectural. But that's also why our designs are a bit more unique. So we specialize in block print. So batik, there are two types, yeah. There's block and there is what do you call it? Chanting, freehand. Yeah, later I can show you some of the block prints and the chanting pen itself, yeah, because it's important that you understand how they look like and why, they are what they are. So when I say block prints, so this is what I mean. So if you look at the print, it's this, and GAHARA, we sketch our own block, yeah. So this is our signature block. It's called Ketam Guri. Yeah, it's a combination of flowers. And so if you were to see this particular print anywhere, you'll know that's a GAHARA. But what makes GAHARA different than other batiks? Because number one, it's our signature block. They are all inspired by wood carvings of the palaces in Langkasuka. My creative director is a big dreamer, and he likes to take inspirations from there. So a lot of his travels go towards visiting palaces and whatnot and looking at wood carvings. Now, if you study batik as a technique, it's a form of resistant art, yeah, where we use the wax as a form of resistance, yeah. Resistance meaning when you use the wax as your main medium of art, and then the dyes cannot penetrate through, yeah. And then later when you boil the fabric and then the wax is removed, then the outline becomes part of the design. So the resistant art is something that's very unique in Southeast Asia, but batik is also everywhere across the world. A lot of people may not realize that batik in Malaysia is a lot more identical to African batik in terms of the colors, very, very vibrant. Whereas if you go to Indonesia, yeah, the colors are a lot of earth tones, very, very, a lot more subdued. And that's because batik is a form of symbolic language. So like when you see this and then you see what I'm wearing, yeah, this is something that is done by the community, so artisans from the community, and you can see, so this is what we call like the spine pattern, and then at the back, yeah. So front and back, and then you have the spine. So all of these motifs are placed in a unique position. We call them placement. So batik is actually very unique because back in the day, it was used to sort of like be part of the way the locals communicate. Because, you know, the cultures are very unique where like men and women were not, they don't really like, they don't communicate, as openly as they do today. So for example, the motif can also signify if the girl, the wearer, is married, unmarried, widowed, divorced. And if you go to different palaces in Indonesia, the different types of batik will also signify which part of the palace they are positioned, and then who they serve, and also religion, class systems. Everything is pretty much reflected through the batik motif and the colors and the positioning. Yeah. So all of this is actually a form of language. And that was pretty much how a person can sort of like identify another by just looking at the batik. So batik is actually, it's a form of currency as well back in the day. Yeah, like how we use money, like we talk about, cryptocurrency. But back then, imagine batik was like a form of cryptocurrency back then. Yeah, physical currency. It had a lot of value, and it's also dependent on the fabric, because batik is the best only on fabric made out of natural fiber. So if you were to look at batik prints that's on polyblends, like a polyester fabric, chances are it's digital printed. So today, when it comes to batik, artisanal batik, our biggest challenge is digital print, because digital print is a lot cheaper and it can be printed on all this polyblend fabric, which makes them shinier and a lot more fancier. Yeah, but that's the thing. Just because it's shiny, yeah, it doesn't mean that it's a good thing, because batik, because it's only on natural fibers, it's a lot more comfortable to wear. But again, it goes back to how today's society value fashion. Yeah, because back in the day, batik was not so much about fashion. It was more about the kain itself, the cloth. Yeah, so this is another example of our. You can see the placement difference. Okay, so another thing that makes GAHARA unique, aside from the block design, which is done from scratch, is the color technique. If you notice the color technique here, yeah. So it's very, very difficult to find a color technique like GAHARA, where our creative director, he also traveled to study, the technique of shibori, tie-dyes, and the way we scrunch the fabric, and also the way we use certain ingredients to create the texturization of the print is very, very different. And I'll share with you some of the things that we use is actually salt and sugar. So when you use salt and sugar and you scatter on a piece of batik, depends on the level of wetness, it will create a different kind of battering. So the terms that we use in making batik is very funny. Well, probably amusing to the younger generation. It's like roti canai technique, you know. But basically, when we say roti canai, so you imagine when a person is making roti canai, the way play with the dough, that's literally how we scrunch up the fabric when we are doing the coloring technique. So from a batik maker to another batik maker, they understand what it means. We're not talking about the final effect, we're talking about the processing itself. So that's why when we say, oh, ini batik garam, batik gula, teknik garam gula combined together. It's the same as somebody saying, if you go to Japan and say, oh, this is shibori technique, which is, folded and then sewn, and they tend to use a lot of indigo, or the tie-dye technique, which I think is very popular amongst the younger generation, yeah? So tie-dye, you tie and then you dye. So some of these techniques, has been around for a very, very, very long time. But today, the challenge is that the younger generation are not really interested in batik. Yeah, mainly because artisanal batik takes a long time to do. Like what I'm wearing here, it takes a long time to do actually. It can take up to, anywhere between a week to 5 weeks, depending on the weather. Yeah, because the weather plays a very big role. Like right now, it's the rainy season. In Kelantan, it's the flood season. Straw production is halted. But even during the rainy season, when we are still producing batik, what normally happens is the color absorption will be different. It'll take longer to absorb color. And the final artwork is not the same as what we would imagine. So in other words, I can take two pieces of the same hue, but they will never be the same. And the strength of the sun, and then the humidity in the air, the amount of breeze, all that play an important role in the final outcome. So when we customize batik for customers, you always tell them in advance, a batik piece can change in terms of the color by up to 30%. Sounds a lot, right? But to the naked eye, you won't see the difference. But that 30% is a lot to an artisan. Yeah. So that is why the more you learn about batik, the deeper the appreciation you have. So what I normally recommend to my customers is that if you like batik, wearing batik is one thing, but it's good that you take a course in learning how to do batik. Because when you know how to do the batik, and then even better if you can go and visit our batik centers. In Malaysia dua je, Kelantan dan Terengganu. You have a different way of looking at kain batik, and you also have a different way of appreciating the different kinds of color blends and motif placement and so forth. Like for example, like what I'm wearing now, a lot of people would say, oh, okay, that's pretty. But the truth of the matter is a lot of my customers who come into the store and buy this and use it as a tablecloth, which decreases the value. So what I normally recommend is that you help to up the value of batik by also being a bit more creative in the final product. Yeah. So for example, I made a modern dress. Yeah. And I'm wearing it with, I don't think you can see, but I'll show you. Okay. So all the way down. Okay. Yeah. So this is a dress, a batik dress. Yeah. And for this fabric, 2 meters alone is actually not very expensive. It's pretty cheap because if you go directly to the source, you can get it way below 20 ringgit for 2 meter. But when the problem is when the middleman comes into the picture, buys it, makes it into something, sells it, then the price pretty much escalates. So that's another challenge that we have in the batik world, where we just don't have a price regulation. Yeah, and this is something that affects arts and crafts in Malaysia across the board. Yeah, so other batik brands that you have in Malaysia, like Captain Batik, Fern Batik, Batik Boutique, what they normally do is they will just buy ready-made batik and they focus on silhouettes and in the finishing products. But for GAHARA, we focus on fabric making, not so much in the finishing product. And we also help customize the designs, the composition for our customers. Yeah, and because of that, we are a little bit more expensive. But we don't like to consider ourselves luxurious. We're not a luxury brand. No, we are. It's just that the price is a little bit more expensive because to produce our fabric, which is between 2 to 5 meters, it takes about 3 artisans to do. So if you factor that, basically when you purchase, our fabric, you're actually helping to sustain, the income of 3 different artisans. So that's another thing why GAHARA is a little bit more unique. We are a social impact company. We're not about profit. We make just enough. The directors, that's 3 of us, we barely have an income. Because for us, it's about being the mediators to ensure that we bring in enough projects to the batik community in Kelantan. Yeah. So whenever I go back to Kelantan, it's mainly to kind of like have a look at, okay, so are there any batik makers that would require projects, opportunities, and then we will sort of like find ways to sort of like bring that project. So we outsource. So for that, we have another brand called GAHARA label. So like what I'm wearing will come under GAHARA label. Yeah. So these are some of the ways that we're helping to diversify, at the same time preserve batik. So preservation in a sense that we are still trying to educate the ways of doing traditional batik, educating people what Malaysian batik is all about, based on the motif, placements, colors. And also we're trying to promote batik. We're trying to bring the product out and promote it to as many customers as possible, especially the tourists. Yeah. But then comes the biggest challenge that we have. The biggest challenge that all batik makers have in Malaysia right now is, well, we have two. Number one is identity. What is Batik Malaysia? Yeah. And then the other one is actually the ignorance of Malaysians with Batik Malaysia itself. So when you have an identity crisis, everything else, pretty much collapse underneath. So for example, if you look at a batik from Indonesia, Indonesia has 8 centers for batik, yeah. Bali, Jogja, Cirebon, and then you have Yogyakarta, and then Pekalongan, to name a few. And then, so each different centers of batik highlights different aspects. For example, some may focus more on colors of the sea because they are coastal, like we are in Kelantan, Penambang is coastal. And then some, they focus more on chanting. Some uses more on symbolic motifs like dragons, Garuda, which is phoenix and all that. In Malaysia, it's a little bit more limited because when Islam came into the region, Islam became the adopted religion of Malaysia. And back then, Tanah Melayu. So because of that, all these, figure aspects and whatnot was removed from the literature of batik. So what we have instead was geometry and flora. So the fauna aspect is out. But in Indonesia, Islam is a national language, but art is in a league of its own. So anything to do with their ancestral artistry remains pristine, the same. It to them is that even if you see them having a tattoo, for them that is art. It has nothing to do with God or religion. In Malaysia, it's different. We, it's a little bit more. Everything to do with local arts and craft is religious based, or they dissect it down into politics. Yeah, like Mak Yong, for example, they're arguing that Mak Yong is because in Kelantan only male performers can be on stage. So when you do Mak Yong, the male performers pakai kostum macam yelah Mak Yong punya dancers kan. So to be frank, that it becomes like a drag show because you have men wearing makeup in female costume. So of course, like it goes against the religious department. But at the same time, it's not uncommon, back in the day to have performers, cross-dressing and whatnot. Yeah. And you must remember also, you have performances in the palace, you have performances for the town folk. So the performances for the town folk is usually a little bit less refined. Like performances in the palace, women, there are certain gestures that you can't have. For example, women cannot raise their, your shoulders up because you cannot show your armpit. And this part must always be covered. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts, but again, it goes back to the positioning of your costume and also motifs, and so everything is symbolic. So one of the controversial thing about batik in terms of print is because back in the day, in Indonesia, when you have all these Garuda mythical creatures, it's considered paganistic in Malaysia. So anything that's paganistic, so they, you know, they're very comfortable here. So as a result, our design is a little bit less imaginative. I wouldn't say less creative, no. It's less imaginative if you compare the batik to other regions. So that is why Batik Malaysia, you have to look at it and appreciate it for what it is. Yeah. So a lot of people, when they come into our boutique, they're surprised. Oh, I didn't realize Batik Malaysia is actually very, very pretty, cantik. And there's a lot of options. Yeah, because you go to places like Jalantar, and then they're all digital prints, and most of them come from India, from China. A design is given to them, and then they mass produce. They are able to be sold at 3 ringgit per meter. Of course, people will buy. But batik, the other thing is batik. A lot of people, they don't realize how beautiful batik, because batik you have to open kain, yeah. So if you go to a shop, you will probably see batik folded and just like, just like that. And if you were to value the batik just based on this small surface, you're missing the point. Because batik has a life of its own, yeah. And you need to open the batik, and you need to put it against your skin. That's where the connection, the engagement comes in. So when I open it, now you see there's more than just one tiny square. And that's the spine. And the spine is what I have in front, yeah, for my dress. Then there's the other side. And that's where, close up, you will see the placement, the arrangement of it. And no two batik are alike. So even if they belong to the same family, they look the same, but again, you must open it, and I'll show you. So imagine, yeah, each piece is communicating a language of its own. So this is another one. See the complexity. Okay, from afar, but now I show you from close up. You see the complexity of the batik. So there you go. So some of these, so clearly you can see this is the block print, but it's very common to also have a combination of both. Yeah, but you see the color blending? Yeah. So the white areas are the ones that was hidden with wax, and then it was removed, and then you can see the color. So it's very simple, but now I want to show you. Okay, so this is like just now, the same thing for GAHARA. Look at the intricateness of the block. See, that's hand drawn. Okay, it's a combination of flowers, ketam guri. Okay, you can see. So this is a very simple solid color, 2 colors, right? Okay. Now I show you another piece. From here you can see the background, yeah? And I'll show you close up. Do you see the coloring technique? See the blending? This one, the red. Don't focus on the block anymore, focus on the background. See, that is what makes GAHARA unique. And that is among the artistry for batik. And these are the things you look out for. So when you want to buy batik, don't just look at it face value. You must open it up, but you must also ask questions like, okay, where is the batik from? Because origin is important. Secondly, you must ask technique so that you know what you're paying for. And once you understand the artistry of batik, you do not want to wear a digital printed batik. You're cheating yourself, yeah? This is handmade. So what I'm wearing is handmade. And what I'm wearing is from this collection. from this family. Yeah, I'll show you another one. That's why to sell batik is very challenging to sell digitally. For example, to have online platforms, to have online stores, because if you were to depend on like a flat lay, you know, you kind of like, again, you're missing the point, because batik you have to open it up, and if the fabric is 4 meters, each meter is different. So this is 2 meters. So the color, the block. So what's unique is the placement and the blending. And then there's another thing I want to show you. I can find it. But we normally have batik. Normally you will have a cap moho. A cap moho is like a stamp. It will tell you where it's made. But nowadays, modern batik makers, they don't do it. They don't do that anymore. But traditionally, you will have one spot that will say made kat mana, made in Terengganu, made in Pekalongan, Cirebon, made in Penambang, and that will tell you where it's from, so that you will understand, oh, this is why the motif is like this, is why the colors are like this. So when a person walks in with a particular batik design into a village, they already know this is an outside, this is an out of towner. But from the motif, they can tell from which particular area. So that's how important the placement and the colors are. I'll show you. Wait. Another. So this is another type of print. Babanyutan sikit lah kan. And then, so you can see. Ni tengok dekat. Now, if you go to Indonesia, okay, what is interesting is that in between all these spaces, you will see very, very fine drawings, and all by hand. And that's how precise their workmanship is. And don't be surprised, an artisan with that kind of level of expertise can easily be in their 30s or 40s. You probably would imagine, oh, this must be like somebody in the 70s or 60s. No, because they learn from young. And usually this kind of artistry, you inherit. You don't go, and there's no college, there's no degree, diploma to learn. It's inherited. So traditionally, people who can do batik, they are considered gifted. That's why artisans, they have a different placement in society. If you study history, I want to show you our blog. So for design and architecture students, I know that you guys are very obsessed with your Faber-Castell, Stabilo pens. In the batik world, we have this. This is a chanting. So imagine a quill pen in the Western world, kan? So this is a chanting pen. So ada lubang sini. So you dip it in a pot of boiling wax, and then it will come out through here. So just like your Faber-Castell collection, chanting pen has a collection as well, and each collection has a name, and it's the difference in terms of the fineness of the tip. Now, the more refined the tip, the more challenging it becomes, because it's all about temperature. So the distance between where your wax and then your fabric cannot be too far. And just like when you study figurative drawing, it's in the wrist. It's not in your arm, it's in your wrist. So you need to make sure that it's smooth. Now, you see a lot of pictures where, the fabric is sort of like stretched out, and then people are doing batik like this. But it's also very, very common to go to villages and see artisans sitting and holding their fabric and just doing this. That is the level of pro. In other words, they don't even need to stretch the fabric. They can just chant it just like that. And you see this very common in Indonesia. That's why they don't need to have a fancy atelier or a fancy workshop. They can chant, and you do chanting anywhere. And then you have the block. So this is the block. So you can have a look, yeah. So the block is actually very, very fine. So yeah, against the white background. There you go. But there are 3 layers from the side. The handle is one. This is another middle section, another layer. And then you have the bottom layer. Okay. So normally the artisan will sketch on a piece of paper, and the block maker will literally just do this by just taking long pieces of copper and twirling it. They heat it and they twirl it on that piece of paper. So nothing digital about it, pure manual. And so what we normally do to avoid competition is, so after the block maker has done, say, our block, he will destroy the piece of paper. So there'll be no evidence. Yeah, that's how we protect our trade. Okay. And then for like this, it will be around 250 ringgit kalau nak buat, and it can be done in 5 days. Shockingly, 5 days. But it's a 9 to 5 job. So a block maker can do this in 5 days. Yeah, for about anywhere between 180 to 150. This one will be around 250. Yeah, but it can only be copper, because copper goes well with the heat. Because if you use any other metal, lama-lama you buat macam ini kan, and then it will distort the shape, and then it wouldn't be fine, and your block would slowly be worn out. So even for us, even though we're using the best metal, which is copper, after a few months we cannot use it anymore. So that in itself makes a design exclusive. So what we do is we will keep and we'll use it as a decoration. But this block is what we call a virgin block. There's no wax. So if you were to look at a block that has wax, that has more value, even though it looks uglier, it has more value to an artisan. And we normally say that when the block, the copper has meet the wax, it has a soul. So this is what we call a soulless block. It hasn't got a soul yet. Yeah. But if you want to use this as a decoration at home, you want to frame it up on the wall, this would be good. But now that you know more about batik, I would recommend that you invest and get one that has wax. It has been used, it has a soul. But some people would find it creepy lah pula. It's like, oh, it has a soul, I don't want lah. So because traditional arts and craft, when they're doing their work, they normally would recite prayers and all that, especially crease maker. That's why when you look at crease, there's always a piece of fabric that they will tie, because every crease has a spirit, and when they tie it, it's to make sure that the spirit, the protector, your protector, is contained. It's like a genie in a bottle. But it's funny because in the West, this whole idea of genie in a bottle, there's a genie in a lamp, and then you rub the lamp, the genie comes out, and then you can grant your wishes. We laugh about it, but when we talk about it in a similar context in Malaysia, the crease had the spirit inside and all that, everybody gets freaked out. Oh my God, that's like shirik, paganistic. So, I mean, that's the irony, if you ask me. Yeah. So everything that we do in traditional arts and craft has a form of spirituality in that sense. Because if you want something to, as we do something, every ritual, every form of activity, there's always prayers attached to it. like how we say prayers before we eat, before we go for an exam, praise for good luck. They do that as well. So with every piece of fabric. And talking about that, so that's why you have batik. Batik is usually not sewn. It's tak dijahit, yeah. And so normally batik yang tak dijahit is used for funerals. And some people are very, very superstitious. If the batik was used to cover a coffin in a funeral, they don't want to use it for any other purpose. There's also batik that's for childbirth, sunat, kan, khatan, and then there's also for weddings, you name it. There's batik for every occasion. Yeah, but it depends on how superstitious you are. Yeah, so I think that's kind of like an overview.
Yeah.
I can go on the whole
Oh my
day.
God! I tell you, I think we could. I think no, half an hour or an hour won't be enough for this one. I think there has got to be a series on this one, and I'm going to talk to you further about that series. But that's
Look at this.
Oh gosh.
Marble. Nampak tak? Macam marble.
Yeah.
Teknik dia.
It's really good.
There you go.
That's
And then
really
this motif ni walaupun nampak macam bunga, tapi ni kita panggil dia motif kris.
It's
Jadi macam
fantastic.
bentuk kris. Macam pendek sikit.
It's really good. Okay, I just want to go straight into the question. What everything you said was incredibly informative. That's amazing, and I think definitely you're going to benefit from it. So the questions from Dr. Jinchi. Dr. Jinchi has raised just 3 questions. Number 1, our students have 5 themes to choose from when they're doing the project from the module: preservation, revival, sustenance, assimilation, and trends. From the little I know of your team and your efforts to preserve our cultural heritage of batik through GAHARA and Malaysian Craft Council, could you share with us if or how the 5 themes can be related to the works? GAHARA, I think you have definitely answered part of that question, but in terms of an overall, how does any of those words, is it true that some of these key terms like preservation, revival, sustenance, assimilation, trends have a strong connection to what you're doing in GAHARA?
Yes. In fact, when I looked at the themes, I initially was going to suggest I cover all 5 because to choose one is ideal. But the conversation of batik today is a combination of all 5 because as much as we discuss or we describe batik in a past tense, but sustainability goals is where we have to look forward. And it's not easy when it's a form of artistry that is not easily digitized. So among the things that we are trying to do is first, batik is not an individual effort. It's a communal project, and it has to be looked at from a systemic perspective. So for example, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, where my interest in batik is not so much about the creative part. I leave it to the artisans. That's their skill. For me, it's about coming up with ways on how they can sustain work and also looking into how to better the existing ecosystem. For example, in wastewater management, because batik is very polluting because, we use a lot of dyes and those dyes are still toxic. Yeah, but it's the same in any aspect of the fashion industry, leather making, anything to do with coloring, it's the same thing. We're having the same problem, but the difference is that because we still use when you have something that's still traditional, so the disposal of the wastewater becomes one of my personal concern, because we need to find ways to modernize certain things. So maybe the artistry is a separate thing when it comes to preservation, but I think there are certain things that we can't preserve. as status quo. We need to innovate. So this is where we are trying to work with various agencies, actors, and universities, because you need researchers. This is where R&D has to come into the picture. So there have been research done, and there have been proposals on how to recycle this wastewater and to reduce the level of toxicity, and to for us to be able to like reuse the disposed punya what liquid ke apa kan. But the thing is, back then, a few years ago, they were saying something around 500,000 for a mechanism they can do such thing. Of course, the community is such that it's not a feasible figure kan, 500,000. So I think one of the things that we need to look into, researchers, developers need to look into, is how to reduce the cost and how to sort of like make better, come up with a better system but at a cheaper cost. Because right now, if you go to this kawasan-kawasan kampung kan, we're still using traditional methods where we're disposing it just like pouring it into anywhere. And it's not illegal.
Yeah.
It's not illegal because it's something that the community sort of like accepts, close one eye. But today we're talking about climate change. We're talking about we're talking about SDGs, and we're talking about best practices. So these are the things we have to change the conversation, or at least the discourse when it comes to this. The other thing is our occupational safety when it comes to the artisans and how the conditions that they are working. Like one of the things that as an outsider, it's a lot easier for me to sort of like comment on this, because the first thing I experienced when I went to a batik punya production place, it's very heaty, and then the wax, the melting wax, it releases a kind of fume, so it's like going to a printing punya factory, and then with the ink, you're smelling fumes, or a variety of fumes, and they're all toxic. So I used to question, what are we doing? Because you don't they wear gloves and all that, wear masks, but at the same time, it's not like there's no certification, there is no inspection. What from my experience so far, I think the kind of inspection that's been done in these kind of places, like macam for nyamuk Aedes, because banyak air bertakung.
Right.
But they don't question about the wastewater management that's in storage. And we use a variety of chemicals as well for the processing. So all of these things, need to be examined. Maybe not to be judged or to be questioned, but it needs to be sort of like examined to see if we can improve the practices. So these are some of the efforts about moving forward that I think is important for the younger generation to maybe take it to another level.
Yeah, good point. Hopefully, maybe in future they could come up with organic material to produce like organic wax. So then you don't have to worry about toxicity of those materials used. And there's one more question. Since you're focusing on preservation, the term preservation connotes antiquity. To those who appreciate it, objects of the past or historical events are deemed priceless and valuable, but to others, sometimes it may be misconstrued as old and irrelevant. How do you change people's mindset about that? Or is there even a need to do so?
Yeah. So the Malaysian Craft Council hosted an event in Kota Baru at the big, when was it? Yeah, we did it in November last year, and we had a panel of experts come on board. We had a representative from the British Council. We had Suryani Senja. She used to be the chairman of Craft Tangan. And then I was there representing Malaysia Craft Council. And one of the interesting things that popped out through that session was the word preservation. Because the word preservation is becoming like a bad word. Because preservation makes it sound like we're stuck in time. But what we need to do is we need to kind of like give this idea that preservation is also something that is not a form of suspension, but something that can be used to move forward. So I remember we were having a conversation, and Florence from the British Council was saying that the word preservation itself, or the jargons that we use, also need to sort of like be re-examined. And one of the ways that I suggested that we can change perception is like I showed them I had a jacket on, and a jacket made out of a batik like this from the community, but I was wearing it was from Batik Terengganu. And I asked the audience, I said, how much do you think this jacket would cost? And I if it was sold at Zara. And then I said that, and then they were like, guessing and everything. And it was, I told them, this is something that we need to change. That's something that your generation can change, which is how you view fashion. Because when I'm wearing this, they're like, well, it's cool jacket, it's like something that you will get from Zara or H&M. But the moment you're like, oh, it's batik and you can get it from a batik boutique, the mindset is like, it's not fast fashion. But I said the thing is, at the end of the day, it's batik, and it's actually something that you can wear anywhere in the world. And they admit it's pretty. But I said, so what is the perception? Why the moment you hear the word batik, you're like, because batik to them is like something that their parents wear, macam official punya event ke apa ke. So I said, I told them, the young generation, you have to help change this mindset through your digital language, because that is your language of the future. And I suggested that, for example, you use TikTok videos to sort of like show the process of batik, from something traditional, like, a piece of fabric like this into something, something cool and funky. And I told them that, you can also do school projects to help make batik fun, and I think it's all about the power that you have in your own hands now, because you can't depend on the older generation punya capacity and language. For example, I said, if I were to talk about batik from a historical perspective, there is a set of language that I must use. But I said, but moving forward, you can change the way we talk about batik moving forward. Again, like when I told them, that our batik prints is more identical to South African batik. Then the first thing they were like, oh my God, we didn't know that batik, South Africa has also batik. I said, and that's the other thing, knowledge. With the internet, you can learn so much more, and the speed of learning is also there. So I said, why don't you guys just type batik and see what happens and where it takes you. So I think changing the mindset works differently for different generations. Like the older generation, they have a lot of association to preserve the traditional aspects of arts and craft. That is fine. But you also have the younger, another generation that's more focused on the entrepreneurial aspect of arts and craft. And then you also have the government agencies in using batik or anything traditional as a form of commodity. We call it tourism currency, which is something that we are also questioning, because sometimes what happens is the governments, when we highlight batik, we tend to make it like too touristy. So that's why we use the word tourism currency. So the value of batik is just relegated to or restricted to, okay, like touristy, tourism, some souvenir. It's got to go beyond that. And then there's the younger generation. So GAHARA did a competition with the Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia, PAM, recently. And we did a competition to look for the next millennial batik print, or or at least a block, So the architect students have to design something, okay, that can be taken and converted into a block, and it will be something that they feel that the millennials will want to wear. Yeah. And so in other words, we throw the idea to them and we said, look, what do you think Malaysian batik for the millennials should be? And so we had about 87 entries, and you'll be surprised how the ideas from the young generation is, because it shows how their communicative languages. I had one design guna satay sticks, arrangement of satay sticks, you know. From afar you will see that there's like macam geometric, you know, architect students kan. But then bila you tengok and then bila you read dia punya explanation, it's actually batik stick. Memang betul. Batik pula. Satay stick. So I call it batik sticks. But element is satay kan, stick and then daging, dia arrange semua. So it's very fascinating. So that's why I think the younger generation should be given more platforms as well by the older generation. And by doing that, we need to allow space for new interpretation.
So basically, bringing the significant batik into a more interpretivist or interpreting them through new forms of experimentation for the younger generation, but at the same time preserving what batik is, preserving as what you said, you know, the value.
From my experience as an entrepreneur, after all these years in batik, I realized one thing. People, the younger generation especially, they would want to wear batik. I mean, we can't dictate the print for the millennial. So that is why I'm very fascinated with in doing projects where I get to tap into their mind and I get to understand a little bit more about their language, of how they understand, perceive, and interpret batik.
So it's not like we are crossing any lines in cultural appropriation, is it? Because speaking of interculturalism, the role of designers in this case, if they were to bring this into a new interpretation for the most postmodern or now and the future, as you mentioned, the millennials and beyond, would there be any lines crossed when it comes to culturally appropriating what batik traditionally represents in this case?
Yeah, there have been lines crossed, and I think one of the controversy when it comes to batik, and when I say this, it's always from an intergenerational perspective, because when you have a room full of but you have batik lovers, batik makers, you know, batik traders, batik collectors, and of different generation, you'd be surprised, you know, how everybody just have a different perspective on batik. It's one of the things that they highlight was batik. You can be creative with batik design dengan you punya print ke, you punya placement ke apa ke, as long as you don't politicize it. You know, for example, we have a lot of artists that uses batik as a technique for their artwork on a canvas kan, and tekniknya batik, tapi dia punya composition tu is something very ada macam political statement and everything. So one of the criticism that was raised was that don't bring politics into batik.
So do you see batik as a culture in the intercultural side? Like say if the Malaysian batik cross culture in terms of interculturalism or applying batik in intercultural arena.
In Malaysia, more than in Indonesia, because Indonesia they're a little bit more traditional because they are still very symbolic, you know, in their composition. Malaysia, because of Islam, kan, they would rather, I think that's why we have geometry designs, we have abstract designs, and then and we have a lot of floral prints. So on one hand, you have people criticizing, saying, is that it? what is batik Malaysia? You know, at least Indonesian batik is very specific. But on the other hand, we should embrace that liberal attitude where, you know, it's pretty much anything. Because at the end of the day, you can separate batik as a technique. Number two, from a cultural perspective, you have to break it down even more. Culturally, dari segi production. Number two is the culture of how people wear batik. And then, for example, in Indonesia, there are certain designs that can only be worn by royalty. You know, orang biasa tak boleh pakai. So, and they practice it until today. Even though this whole monarchy system has been abolished in Indonesia, but the motif, the print is still very strong. Ini hanya, you know, hanya kerabat boleh pakai. So that's the cultural aspect, you know. So wearing it is one form of culture, and then the color, the design is another culture, and then there's also the technique, you know, the artistry as a technique.
The culture.
And there's also another part that you need to also understand about batik ni, which is the historical aspect, you know. And when you talk about the historical aspect of local arts and craft art nation, you have to embrace the spirituality of it as well.
Right. So that's I suppose is the proprietary thing of the Malaysian batik culture, or the batik culture in general in this country, and everything that you explain is very much directed to that. So what do you think designers should do in future if they were to, for example, new millennial designers, what do they need to do in terms of projects and future projects, like involving more in the age of digitalization? If they were to scan a batik or create detailed digital drawings of batik, how can they make that digital version of a batik be the same as the or be on par with the proprietary aspect of what you've just explained?
I think the most important thing is don't do something that will kill. Don't promote a form of artistry that will kill another form of artistry.
Right.
I think that's a fundamental rule. You can go digital as long as it doesn't kill the artistry of doing, you know, artisanal handmade punya batik. And I think what is important for designers today is if you want to go down any art technique route, batik being one of them, you must study its history. You cannot avoid its historical element. In order to go to the future, you do need to go back in time and understand the genesis, number one, but also the evolution. Because what you're bringing to the table in the future is also going to be part of the evolution. You need to do that so that you make sure that what the changes that you're doing to the batik technique or the batik punya movement or batik punya industry is not, you're not altering the DNA of batik. That's number one. Because when you alter the DNA, you're creating a mutation. We don't want that. We don't want mutation. We want a variety, and meaning there are certain signatures that need to be there. And only by studying the traditions, by studying the history of batik, then you understand what are those signatures. For example, I'll give you one clear example. Like all our prints is floral. So like in this case, you can see the floral punya detail, okay? And in this, nampak dia punya floral punya detail.
Yeah.
The curvature of the petals and all that. That is inspired by the mudra, hand punya gesture. Macam tu. And then we have design.
Wow, that's cool. I like that.
Medallion yang ini. This is from the buckle of a Mak-Yong dancer. So,
right.
The reason why GAHARA is unique, especially to foreigners, where if you want for COVID, 80% of the visitors that walk into our boutique, they're all foreigners. They are batik makers, batik lovers, batik collectors, educators, researchers, artists. And what they like about it is the fact that there's always that signature or that traditional element. Like all our design is based on Langkah Suka, the history of Langkah Suka. Because you can't remove that from our history. And then there's a bit of Indonesia, there's a bit of, you know, Malaysia, because we are under the old Malays. The old Malay punya kingdom is a combination of, we call it the Nusantara.
Correct.
So one of the problems that we have in today's discourse when it comes to batik, especially kat Malaysia, it's too politicized. We make it too territorial. So that's another thing that you need to make sure that in the future, don't make batik territorial. Tak boleh. That's why one of the things that GAHARA we do is we collaborate with other batik makers. We don't see each other as competitors. We see each other as collaborators. Your batik is your batik, our batik is our batik. Macam tu. Like Fern Batik. Fern studied batik making under Nick Faiz, our creative director. So now she has her own boutique. She specializes in floral pastel colors. So she's bringing a different variety, a different strain to the table. Everybody has space at the batik punya table, but it's just that make sure that what you're doing is you're not kind of taking it off tangent, and don't kill it with, don't westernize it ke apa ke and all that. Study the traditional motif, because everything has a story behind it. Every motif, the curve, and then the placement. You don't just do batik. For example, if you look at our baju kan, okay, so placement is important. Like you cannot cut a medallion in half. You kena sambungkan. You must make sure that the motif is combined. I'll show you another example. Okay, so you see, so walaupun dia buka sini, tapi motif dia gabung. Placement dia. This is called placement lah. So you cannot simply just cut a piece of batik fabric and then sew it together like a patchwork. The motif must meet. The placement too is important.
Has to have the sense of continuity. The narrative has to connect.
This is the balance.
Yeah.
Dua di tengah, it looks like a pair of lungs kat tepi. Tapi symmetry. Penting. So these are among the signature prints, because you have to give respect to the motif, the placement. Just like the yin and yang as a symbol.
Yeah.
You understand the yin and yang, how it's drawn and divided. You can't dissect a yin and yang into four fractions.
Yeah, absolutely. Interconnected.
Yes. So these are I wouldn't say pantang larang, but I would say that these are the things that you need to really understand. The younger generation of designers, you cannot remove history.
So you can't remove that. Even no matter how no matter how digitalized they want to go, but that cannot be removed. That has to be the basis of it.
Because digitization is also it's a new form of platforming, actually.
Yeah, it's just a platform. Yeah.
Exactly, but you cannot run away from understanding the fundamentals. Just like you can draw, you might like to draw anime, but you still need to go through figure drawing, and you need to understand some of the basics, which will make you a better artist. But for batik, memang, you can come up with your own ideas, but there has to be a sense of rhyme and reason, and you must also take into the consideration its basic philosophy, the traditional aspects of it, and the signature. Because ideally your batik print, say if you were to come up with your own brand, your batik should still have the signature of, okay, bila orang tengok, dia tahu, this is GAHARA. GAHARA is Kelantan, Kampung Penambang, which has 300 years of history in batik making and trading. So you need to have those signatures. You can't just create something out of nothing. So,
well, thank you so much. I think we'll stop here for now. I think I got I got other questions to ask, but I don't think because I don't think we can we have time. But seriously, thank you so much. But this is not the end. I think if it's okay with you, once you're in KB, I know it's going to be flooded.
The,
Then,
the
but
flood is going down, but the bigger problem now is the potential announcement for interstate punya
yeah,
closure.
yeah. We're waiting for the announcement at the moment.
Yeah.
So never mind. We'll just play by ear. But just want to thank you so much for this time. Thank you so much for your explanation. And I think I personally have learned things which I've never heard before. I've never really thought about certain things. And I'm beginning to see batik in a very, very different way now. Even at the Troublemakers conference, you mentioned one thing, the mythological aspect, but
Yes.
now there's something more very design significance here, which
Yeah.
I never really quite understood. And I like that interesting analysis that you've also explained. I think you've done a lot of analyzing yourself. So I look forward to that. And I've
Pasal
got
batik kena.
and there's some things I will definitely want to talk more about you.
Yeah,
Uh,
thank you. I just want to add that even for us, even though
yeah,
like I'm more business
yeah,
related with my other partners, but we have to go and do batik juga.
yeah.
We all have to go through the whole rigmarole. You
The
have
experience.
to
Yeah.
understand. Yeah, experience.
So okay, so yeah. Well, we'll catch up again. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll be editing this one, so I'll give you the link to this.
Good
Uh,
luck with editing.
yeah. So
Our conversation can go on.
one last things you want to say to the students. I know you will definitely see them again, but maybe you want
Mm.
to have some last exhortations you want to say to them.
Yeah, so I would like the students to sort of please go online, type batik, and you allow yourself to go on a journey. You will also discover that in 2009, UNESCO has acknowledged batik, but Indonesian batik, as a World Heritage Preservation punya artifact. And I want you to also understand that when something like that happens, that it shows that batik now, especially for Indonesian batik, is a protected entity. It's a protected artistry. Yeah. So Malaysia, we are trying to do that, but to apply for something like that, we need to have documentation. We need to have we need to have concrete evidence of such. But the thing is that is another thing I want to share with you guys about how something like this can be preserved. But to move forward, please always learn, go back and embrace the artistry, the history, the cultural aspect, understand the indigenous communities that produce batik. Before you come to a conclusion on what you think or feel batik is, never judge batik by what you see. Like, buruk lah, tak cantik lah. There's always a reason to why that print is like that. And when you understand the narrative behind the composition, then you'll have an appreciation. And from there, when you buy the fabric, then you'll know where not to cut and how to cut it. It's artistry from A to Z.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Natasha. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Natasha Hishamudin, CEO of GAHARA International. So if you want to drop by her boutique, we'll definitely drop you the address, and you feel free to visit the boutique when it's safe. Of course, yeah, when it's safe. But you don't have to go in a big group. But during this, is still her boutique is still open, so feel free to drop in, and trust me, you will be amazed. I personally am definitely planning to go. So take care and thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, guys.